book that's now in its third printing. I don't know if you can see it or not. I always thought that this book, which deals with different approaches to protection from radiation, nothing in the way of a solution, just some strengthening of the immune system and strengthening of our defenses. I always would hope that this book would lead to something better, and I know that Osama's copy or two of this circulated after Chernobyl. It's been around, and what I'm wanting to illustrate is that since 3 Mile Island, I've gotten increasingly involved in a number of groups, including the Omni Center, the amazing Arkansas Public Policy Panel, and to some extent the Citizens Climate Lobby, and some other groups which you might not be as familiar with nationally, like the Wild Foundation, which is to preserve wild land all over the world, and the large reserve that's just been set aside in Mali is largely Wild Foundation is responsible for that. And the British Commonwealth's initiative to reverse climate change, which I'm indirectly involved in because all 4 of the people that I'll be talking with you today about and their books have been parts of the policy-making circle of that 53-country initiative to address climate change. So in the last 10 years, after erstwhile activity like this, while being a clinical social worker, I've tried to generate collaborations between climate scientists, open-minded scientists, and people with profound and well-proven intuitive gifts. And this has been an unorthodox approach. It's one that I don't speak briefly about, I don't argue about, but I'm happy to share and would love to share at another time at greater length. But I think although it's been important to me, and to some degree, I think, creating some substantial results in the direction I wanted, which was simply to align scientists with intuitives in ways that were demonstrably helpful for the environment in this case. It's a big speculative area of my life. I'll invite conversation about it another time. Today, and even more important for me, I think, to share are these 5 books with the authors I've worked with. And I have prepared more information quite consciously than I can share. So if you will write down my email address, I will send you the complete transcript of this talk, including all the things we don't cover today, and the things that I would like to share on the talk if we had, say, 3 or 4 hours, and we'll proceed so that I can be more selective along with your help. So my email address is oelsnergeoff@gmail.com. And if you would like to see the entire talk, and it's still developing form, I would be delighted to send it to you. So this allows me to just kind of chill and begin with this now. Here are the books. Each one of them has something to do with an approach to strengthening environmental harmony. Paul Hawkins' Drawdown, which this group dealt with over 2 years ago. Albert Bates's Burn on biochar. Transforming Plastic, also by the wonderful Albert Bates. And the oceanologist Thomas J. Garreau's Innovative Systems of Marine Ecosystem Restoration. And finally, a more general work, which is about cultural change, Daniel Seawall's Designing Regenerative Cultures, a book that's having quite a bit of influence. So, I don't know what you've delved into individually. You may have read some of these books and really not need to hear about them. But what I'd like to do would be to see just a show of hands for which ones of these would be most interesting to you, and then I'm going to proceed by dealing with those. So, Drawdown you know about. I can sing my song. I've written several songs to try to synopsize books in order to make things more accessible to people. And I can talk a little bit about the work I've done with with Paul Hawken if you'd like, but that's a known. I can talk about biochar and Albert Bates's book Burn, and I also have a song about that. It's really enjoyable to find different modes of sharing information. I can talk about Albert's relatively newer book. He has 2 more coming out soon, but this one is called Transforming Plastic. And in the case of any of these books that I share with you, I will share a few positive examples of collaborative work that's being done and receiving, some real appreciation for results, appreciation in the form of spreading in different parts of the world. I could share likewise some summary passages and a few examples from Thomas Garreau's marine ecosystem restoration, and I can share a little bit about cultural and environmental changes that Daniel Wall talks about in his book. Let's see which ones you would find most interesting by a show of hands. First of all, who would like to hear something about drawdown? Right. And how about burn? I see Dick Bennett. I see Lolly. I can't see anything else. I got 2. I'm not seeing Karen, I'm not seeing Terry, and I'm not seeing waiting for name. So Gladys, if you get a note, let me know.
I can see them all, and I don't see any hands either. I think people have some other preferences, so maybe you should keep going.
I see Lolly and I see Dick. Okay, transforming plastic. I see Quinn and I see Joe and I see Dick. Ooh, Lolly.
And John.
Even Leslie. Yeah. And innovative systems of marine ecosystem restoration. It's a big one. It's a terrifying big one.
Terrifying.
And transforming plastics.
Yeah.
Segues nicely, if that's not the right word to use, segues into that book, you'll see. And finally, anything on designing regenerative cultures.
Yeah,
it's a more generalized, more philosophical, less technical. Okay.
Yeah.
So some of this is kind of technical, but please understand that I'm not technically well versed in any of these topics. I'm just somebody who's there supporting the authors and trying to share their work. And again, I will happily, on invitation later, be glad to share my work with intuitive people and climate scientists. But let me begin with transforming plastics. Albert Bates, the author, presently in the Yucatan, working on several books, one on the COVID crisis, the prior one called Sea Change. Before that, wrote this book, Transforming Plastics. And you may know Albert's name. He was one of the early anti-nuclear activists out of Stephen Gaskin's farm in Summertown, Tennessee. He still is. But his range of involvement in the world, his travel, he traveled across the pond something like 12 times last year. He's constantly talking with policymakers and agricultural thought leaders, a variety of people in government, and really doing a lot of work towards, in this case, bringing more awareness to plastic. It's a wake-up call. Have you already had a presentation on plastic bags or other aspects of plastic? No. Okay. Well, this is painful. Today, there is supposedly 1 ton of plastic for every 3 tons of fish in our oceans. How can this be? By 2050 or sooner, there will be, apparently, some believe, more plastic than fish. It's crushing. And it's made me more aware of the degree that petrochemical plastic is in the clothes I wear, the food I eat, and all too often I'm sending it to the landfills and to the groundwater supply and then into the oceans, I suppose. So the book offers some hope. And the transformation really starts on a community level with collaborative campaigns to end things like plastic straws, and it grows to encompass the elimination of biotoxic plastics. And it focuses on the development of biodegradable bioplastics. In the world of plastics, for investors who are thoughtful about the future, or for people who would like to have a future, the emerging biopolymer section is the place to be. The annual growth demand for bioplastics is about 11%. It's going faster. Starch-based plastics are leading the switch because they're biodegradable, as well as plant-based. But industry experts say bio-based plastics could theoretically replace about 90% of traditional polymers. Up until about 100 years ago, all human-use polymers were of natural origin. They were made from things like bones, skin, shells, plant fibers, celluloid, cellophane are natural materials. Casein or casein resins and paints are based on milk protein. So starch polymers, which are kind of the most central of the bioplastics, are usually derived these days from corn, wheat, potatoes, which are gelatinized with heat and moisture, and then they're extruded into form. And when Henry Ford made his Model T, he made it from a soy polymer, his first Model T. And he demonstrated its strength by publicly slamming an axe into the body, and the axe bounced off. But unfortunately, soy proteins have a tendency to absorb water. So it's a good thing that Ford wasn't building boats. And that is a takeaway from nature, that every plastic feedstock, whether it's toxic or non-toxic, has its own character. And you know, you can use some for one purpose and others for another. Same is very true with different kinds of biochar. Another really encouraging potential source for future bioplastics is algae. Microalgae is a solar-powered factory, as you know, for producing renewable biomaterials, and it doubles in biomass daily when the growing conditions are right. So without using all the algae in the world for plastic, knowing that it requires less land and less energy and fewer inputs than corn or soybeans, it could be completely biodegradable depending upon additives. Microalgae is another possibility. What I'm pointing towards here, the hopeful examples I'm giving, please don't think that I'm living with rose-colored glasses on. I'm experiencing, like I'm sure you are, a lot of grief and uncertainty. And I'm not seeing these things as panaceas, but I am seeing a kind of patchwork quilt of solutions emerging, and I'm really interested. So another promising transformative example is the work of David Hackens, Making Plastics Precious, which you can actually find on YouTube. His instructional videos sharing his work group's plan to build shredder, extrusion, injection, and compression machines. And they render various forms of plastic waste reusable. And I can tell you more about this, but I've been talking for a good while. And I want to check in here, Gladys, and see if there are any comments or questions so far. I can't hear you. Unmute yourself.
Not so far. I would like to remind people to put your email into the chat box if you'd like to have the transcript afterward.
Well, and please, since I'm not seeing the chat box, if you'll send me those emails, or if you all would like to just email me directly. So this, there's some amazing work coming from young people. I'll be talking about another young person who's developed an approach to mitigating plastic toxicity. In the case of this guy, Dave Hakens, he's a 23-year-old student when he developed these tutorials, and making plastic precious as part of a graduation project from a design school in the Netherlands. And his videos show how to recycle HDPE plastic, milk bottles, bottle tops, into craft and engineering projects like plates, furniture, roofing shingles, using only simple tools. And the shredder machine, the plastic waste is shredded into flakes to be used in other machines. These flakes can be stored and reused. An extrusion machine, I think you might be able to envision this. It's a process not unlike a 3D printer, actually, in which plastic flakes move into a hopper, melts the flakes, they can be molded, and in fact can be brought into a 3D format to be layered in new and creative ways. And in a compression machine is something kind of similar to an electric kitchen oven, which heats the plastic and flows it into a mold, and it allows for bigger objects to be made, such as countertops, roofing tiles, and blocks. Now, okay, so activist people are getting onto this, and they're actually emulating these things and building these things. It'd be interesting to see what a bright young person with some time on their hands could do with this, or even an old person. And another aspect of bioremediation of plastics is another aspect of what Albert speaks about, and particularly, not surprisingly, references Paul Stamets, the mycologist, about the bioremediation of various toxic plastics by fungi. You know, this is another rather nuanced area. Stamets says, never underestimate the cleverness of mushrooms to find new food, and it's true. Fungi can feast on a lot of different kinds of plastics, but there's an element to this that needs great care. There was a lot of interest in this, but it needed to be qualified by the fact that some kinds of bacterial bioremediation of plastics, if they're not carefully tested, have unforeseen destructive effects on parts of the natural environment that they might when they're prematurely applied. So again, this is something that's just being explored, and deeply. Fungi are a later, fungi thrived at least 1 billion years before plants. And they actually lived in forests of tall mushroom trees. We are actually a later evolutionary branch, as I understand it, extending from those trees. So today, they're the primary decomposers of matter, and they recycle nutrients and water to plants. And they endow fresh soil with new growth, but they are also, they have a decomposing, great decomposing power. They have the microrhizomes have powerful enzymes that break down hydrocarbons. And so the fungi dissolve their food first. They ingest it as a liquid. Some fungi can even break down bare rock to withdraw minerals. And about a century ago, when plastics first started appearing, manufacturers tested their products to determine longevity in comparison to different other things like ceramics or wood or metal. And one test was simply to bury pieces of plastic in the ground and dig them up a year or two later. Welcome to our new arrival. And experimenters found that fungi and bacteria actually deconstructed the polymers. And the digestive enzymes the fungi produced during those early experiments were so refined and powerful that they had made the plastic available as food for the bacteria. So this has been developed and worked on some. It may not even really be necessary to discover many, many better and better decomposing candidates. What we're learning from epigenetics and the application of that to this subject suggests that it might be easier to simply train a given fungus to consume food sources that wouldn't previously have chosen as readily. in bioremediation work with chemicals, for example, the targeted pollutant is introduced to a fungus at ever increasing concentrations. And the fungus actually learns to produce the right enzyme at the right amount because it needs to survive. So to do that, it learns to do that. So just a couple more things, but first let me check in again and see if anybody would like to say anything. I know some of you have just arrived, and this is a lot of information. Okay. Gladys, anything to be shared?
Nothing yet. Glenn says he's sorry that
Gotta go.
he couldn't stay. But would you like to ask if caller 3 or caller? There's a couple of people who haven't introduced themselves, and I wonder if
Let's
either
do that.
would like to tell us who
Yeah,
you are.
we got to make this two-way, if not 15 or 16 way, so 18 way.
Yeah. Okay, so if there's no reply, let's go ahead and continue on then.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. Another piece of research that's quite new about breaking down polymers, plastics. Waxworms feed on the wax in beehives, and so beekeepers typically remove them. And a scientist of the Spanish National Research Council was deworming her beehives when she noticed that the worms had chewed holes through the plastic bag she was collecting them in. She created a paste from the waxworms in a blender and spread the worm homogenate on plastic, and the results showed that something being excreted by the worms degraded the plastic at a molecular level. They couldn't tell if it was an enzyme created by the worms or a bacteria found in the worms or a combination, but they could confirm that the polymer backbone was breaking down into small monomers, and the plastic became ethylene glycol. Meal moths also, in a 2018 study, the gut microbiome of meal moths, the larvae of a particular moth, found that the worms could adjust their gut microflora to digest polymer structures of various plastics. So this kind of approach, I think, could be widely classified under the heading of biomimicry, or learning from nature, if not imitating nature. And at some point, you might be interested in doing a whole call on biomimicry and its implications, because it's extraordinarily progressive right now as a study. One more thing about plastics, and in some ways the most flamboyant and the most promising, and I really don't know just how promising, and it's Boyan Slat's Ocean Cleanup Initiative. Another young man from the Netherlands, honored by the UN, and I remember when he received a prize for the best, I guess, the best environmental idea of the year. In September 18, his campaign to rid the world's oceans of plastic trash. No, there had been a campaign to rid the oceans of plastic trash that went back some years, and in September 18, a giant floating trash collector left California for the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. This was the design of this Boyan Slat and some of his associates. He's a 24-year-old, or was a 24-year-old Dutch college dropout who, after a holiday driving trip to Greece, where he looked at the ocean and was impressed with the scope of the problem of plastics in the ocean, he quit his aerospace engineering studies at Delft University of Technology, and he made ocean cleanup his life mission. He earned $30 million initially through an extraordinary crowdsourcing campaign in which he was able to attract a top-notch staff of 65 engineers and scientists, many of them with a lot of years of experience designing platforms for oil companies. Brr. And he won a Champions of the Earth Award, and like I say, the note from the United Nations, but he was taken to task by some scientists for underestimating the potential risks to marine life, just like ornithologists and people who love birds have taken the designers of windmills, of wind power generators to task at times. The demonstration projects that have been run since 2018 seem, without my going into as much detail as I do in the paper that I can send you, indicate a lot of success. Once it has trapped a certain sufficient volume of plastic in a kind of net that has been designed to not capture fish, a service vessel arrives to collect the plastic and haul it away with a crane and a net. And the plastic is sorted and packed for delivery to recycling plants ashore. And at the start of 2019, the trial that was happening there in the Pacific revealed that the floater held no interest for marine animals and no fish or mammals were trapped in its skirt. What happens is that by allowing waves to run through the system, rather than tossing it around or breaking over it, the Dutch engineers expect the next design to diffuse more and more wind and wave energy to just 5% of the potential destructive force, so that the floater can survive a 100-year storm event as well as not be pernicious to marine life. In other words, they're going through an iterative process and they're trying to refine this approach. And if it stays on schedule, which how could it right now? I don't know. 60 more systems were projected to be at sea this year to gather more than 15,000 tons of plastic a year. Here is where I want this to be true, but don't know just how true these projections can be at the moment. But with these kinds of scalable, relatively energy neutral systems, we're talking about the craft, of course, it is projected to remove 50% of the Great Pacific garbage patch within 5 years and 90% of all ocean plastic by 2040. Of all the things I will share with you today, I find myself to be the most uncertain about that. But it's a projection. And before I turn to Thomas Garreau's book, I think it's important to check how you guys are hanging in here. Or am I remembering correctly that you would rather actually hear about Thomas Garreau and Daniel Wall? I'd better move right along, but I don't want to move too fast. And so any comments? I'm in learning mode, even though I may seem to be teaching, I am in learning mode.
I
Art?
see Shelley and Art have their, and Quinn have their, Art, do you want to start?
Yeah, I want to ask what kind of economic demand there is for the recycled plastic that you might get out of the ocean, for instance, and about economic demand in general. Does it exist? An economic demand for recycled plastic, for instance.
I'll tell you what I know. I'll tell you what I
How
know.
are we going to discourage the production of new plastic in favor of using recycled plastic instead? If you can get the economic machine behind this, then you've got a natural way for it to grow for what you want to grow exponentially because it makes money. And
it appears that there's
some sort of a plastic tax similar to a carbon tax work or anything like that? Or what other economic ways?
I don't know, Art. I don't know. I do know that in the book, there are things that I'm presently not remembering that give more information about economics. But the thing that I do know and remember is that the demand and interest in biodegradable, less toxic, more naturally based plastics is growing. Apparently, over the last 10 years by about 11%. That's not much, but I think it's promising. Beyond that, this is going to be one of those questions that I'm not able to answer.
Thanks, Art. Shelley, do you want to go next?
Oh, I just want to say this is fascinating. I can't follow everything. There's so much information. I think I'm going to have to read the book. I did have a question. Did you talk about microfibers? I was reading about plants drawing up microfibers into their systems and damaging the systems. Does your book talk about that at all?
Book talks about that within the context of ocean and land, soil, and vegetation. And I didn't talk about that. But it's certainly, you know, in addition to mentioning what I said about the ocean, it's certainly true not only of the land, but of our bodies. And those of all, you know, as far as we know, almost all are all biological organisms.
And
That,
I was wondering
yes,
about the
book
mushroom. When the mushrooms digest, or whatever the process is, the plastics, are microfibers created in that situation?
Are microfibers created during the breakdown, which then might not be digested?
Right.
Okay, not sure, but I would hope that scientists observing the process would be vitally concerned with your question.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Quinn, did you want to go next?
Yeah, I had a couple of, can you hear me?
Yeah, good
Okay.
to see you.
I had a couple of things. Yeah, microfibers are a huge problem because they're in our air, they're in the soil, they're in the ocean spray, they're in the water, they're everywhere, and they're in us. And I think a generation or two from now, if we're still around, that is going to be a major problem. And I just wanted to comment on like, for instance, the waxworms, which, listening to you, it sounds like a really good idea, because it sounds like they're eating it and digesting it and actually breaking it down and maybe not having byproducts. But I worry about our doing things like training different things to eat plastics, because we also do that with bioremediation. We use things like, and this was back in the 90s, I remember hearing about this, things like mustard greens that are used to take the heavy metals from the soils where they grow. And some plants are naturally more able to do that than others, but then we go in and genetically enhance that ability. The problem is mustard greens are able to cross-fertilize with a lot of different mustards and brassicas in general, including the things that we eat, and those are going to be then having an enhanced ability to uptake toxins. So what, in some plants, for instance, what used to be a really good thing, like watercress springs to mind for me, because I won't eat it.
Oh, I know what you're saying.
Because
Yes.
watercress cleans water. And that used to be, I mean, when the world was pure, that was a great thing, because it took up more of the nutrient things that we wanted and then gave it to us. But now it's taking up more of the pollution. So when we eat those things, we are getting more of the pollution than ever before. So I worry then about training mushrooms to take up and break down. You know, we just don't think long term.
Yes.
And that is my final point, is that really the reason that so few, I mean 11% is kind of small really in the overall scheme of plastics, that we're able to recycle them, is because it takes a really specific kind of plastic for each given application. You cannot use a yogurt container plastic for the vehicle of, you know, for your car, or, you know, your whatever. There's different applications that they have to be used for. And one of the things that we as a species have to learn and accept is that we have to accept that nothing lasts forever. And that's what got us into plastic. Right? I mean, we want things that don't break. We want things that are going to stay with us because that's cheaper, and then we don't have to replace it. And it's a natural inclination to say, man, I'd love to put this paint on my house that I'll never have to paint again.
Sure.
But when we do that, the best way to do it is to incorporate plastic, which is our downfall. I mean, it's a catch-22 that we have to learn to address, I think. That I just wanted to make that point.
Well, you make several really good points, important points. And I think that the one you made that I'm going to key in on first about the potential dangers of mismatching something that's benign, like say a fungus, to bioremediate that has end up having an unintended negative effect. Or in the case of a plant that uptakes, like Leslie just said, don't pick that beautiful watercress. When we were visiting our grandchild and our daughter and grandchild and our daughter's husband in Bloomington, and we wanted to pick it, but Leslie made me aware of what you were talking about. But I would refer you, if you're interested in my paper, it will refer you to page 58 and following of Albert Bates's book, Transforming Plastic, where he talks about how a woman named Elaine Ingham showed up at a very enthusiastic gathering of scientists talking about the applications of fungus for bioremediation, and shared the devastation of something like a 9-mile square area from an application that was not done with the sort of forethought that you're suggesting needs to be. And I think that you're pointing towards a kind of arrogance on the part of our culture in terms of thinking that we can just go in there and create without really looking at all of the different repercussions of interaction. We can see that in a lot of places. You're also talking about the way in which we're wanting something permanent. And I always think about the book, The Denial of Death. And I think about it more these days, don't you know, as I see the tragedy of rationalization and denial, not to mention the deep tragedy and sadness of people believing things they've been told, having the wool pulled over their eyes. So you speak to a tough area there, and I think it's very important. Thanks for all your points. Anybody else? Art?
Geoff, I just want to second your mention of The Denial of Death. I forget the author's name, but I read that book about, it must have been 20 years ago.
Oh, Lord.
It made an impression on me. You want to read that? Everybody ought to read that book, especially Americans who are so lightheaded about the serious side of life.
It's raining.
Yeah.
Can you all hear it? Isn't that exciting?
Yeah.
Well, I shall continue. I'd like to say a little bit more about the situation of the ocean, but it's so extremely negative and difficult. I do want to say that kelp forests, being really good habitats for fish and cooling coastal waters, reduce storm impact, and they can be sustainably harvested for their biomass, out of which kelp, one of the forms of biochar, can be made. And the more of the forests we make, the more fish in the ocean. So kelp permaculture, forest permaculture, is being practiced in quite a few places now in the world, and restoring the ocean's kelp forests, which again, biochar can help, and other marine vegetation sequesters carbon. Of course, it builds oxygen. It has a tendency to deacidify water too. So there are other things that I could share that would be much more dire and distressing, but I think that I will proceed to tell you a little bit about Thomas Garreau. His mother was an oceanologist, and he edited this book, which is a series of articles on an approach to mitigating the demise or the fading of coral reefs because of the mass mortality of corals around the world caused by global warming and acidification. Tropical beaches that were growing actually until recently had begun this rapid erosion, and barrier islands are washing away, which leaves coastlines more vulnerable to sea level rise and storms. But Garreau and his mother have helped to pioneer an approach that's being experimented with and found helpful in a variety of places in the world, which is what this book is about. It's about these experiments, and there's nothing chatty about the book. It's a series of rather, scientifically detailed experiments. Garreau calls himself a geotherapist, like Albert Bates, like Daniel Wall in particular, and like Paul Hawken. They've all been members of the policy-making inner circle of the British Commonwealths. That's 53 nations that have been associated with the British Empire in the past, including India, Canada, variously connected in an initiative to help reverse climate change. So my friends have been really having an impact, and I'll be sharing with you Garreau's work. But first I want to share not only his book, but here is Albert, just to the closest to my face. Here's Daniel in the middle, and there's Thomas Garreau. They're all together in London, I think it was, or it might have been at Paris or Copenhagen. I believe it was in London for one of these meetings. Yeah, so Garreau has doctorates in astrochemical physics, in planetary physics. I have no idea what that is, Art. And he's a second generation oceanologist, and he has some really visionary books, including a book on geotherapy for soil fertility and carbon sequestration. There's a really good video of Garreau's work in a recent YouTube interview of him conducted by Daniel Wall. The video is called Marine Regeneration, Corals, Salt Marshes, Mangroves, and Seagrass Meadows. And if you send for my talk, all these links are there. So according to Garreau, what we think at the best might take hundreds of years to reverse probably will take thousands of years to gradually truly reverse if we're able to. We're really, without making some sort of pronouncement about it, we can say truly that we're in it for the long haul. And the video that is so clear as 10,000 words might not be, shows projects focused on coral and salt marsh regeneration. And these are projects using a technology called the BioRock methodology. It's based on iron grids underwater that run a small DC current. So BioRock electric grids are grown rather quickly by low voltage electrolysis of seawater, which causes growth of limestone rock minerals dissolved in seawater over steel surfaces. And these BioRock shore protection reefs are open mesh frameworks. They permit water to flow through them like coral reefs do. And the size and the shape of the structures are designed in order to dissipate incoming wave energy. So this can help replenish oyster and mussel beds. It can in general support the bioproductivity of depleted and degraded marine areas. It's being used to regenerate seagrass meadows around Mallorca and other Balearic islands in Spain and Indonesia. The approach has been used as a functional alternative to protecting beaches through concrete seawalls, which is questionable in its functionality. Coral reefs, and here I bring up bioremediation again. provide the most perfect natural shore protection, dissipating around 97% of the incident incoming wave energy by their frictional resistance. So these bio-rock constructions are designed in that way. And the healthy reefs produce sand actually as well as protect it. And they help build beaches behind them in that way. Largely, the sand is remains of calcareous green and red algae. And every grain of white limestone sand on a tropical beach is the skeletal remains of a living coral reef organism. So this is really important because the mass mortality of corals around the world caused by global warming is just, there must be ways of reversing it, and this appears to be at least one. Here's one report, quote, although these structures were small, new beach growth was clearly visible at all sites within 8 months on Google Earth images. One set of structures was of and creation of a gap underneath it. That doesn't make sense. So that it was on the way to falling down. I must have said it was off. 1 year later, the gap underneath had completely filled in and the sand had risen to about 1 meter to cover half the vertical wall height. The seawall on the neighboring property, built at the same time, but not protected by biorock, completely collapsed within the year. We are now about 1.5 hours into a presentation that most human beings find difficult to maintain attention for more than this period of time, particularly with this kind of inflow of information. So let's check in and see whether folks want to stick around or whether you've, intellectually had it up to here.
No, I'm happy with this. This is incredible information. We usually go to 3 or even 3:30.
I'll continue, and if people are, uncomfortable or want to go out and enjoy sitting on your porch and enjoy the rain, just let me know if you'd like me to send you what I've written, because there's a lot more in it than I will be able to share today, even about the topics I'm sharing on.
Geoff?
And Geoff, we've only gone an hour. We didn't officially start till 1:30, and I see that it's now 2:30, so we're doing
That's
good.
just I'm not thinking straight because I'm locked into this. I'm sorry. Okay.
Geoff,
Yeah.
Arlene put a quote in a link into the chat that I wonder, Arlene, if you'd like to just talk about that a minute. Or you just read your quote if you'd like to, or read your description of the link.
Is she muted?
Yeah, she's muted. Can I unmute you, Arlene?
Do it.
Maybe you could read it. Could one of it, Gladys, if you want that read, could you read it?
Is that okay,
Yeah.
Arlene? I'll just go ahead and read it. The IUCN is preparing to launch an updated nature-based solutions. I'm not sure of what. Typically, this approach is in contrast to reductive engineered approaches. Global nature-based solutions protocols from the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. These protocols can be used in the planning, management, and maintenance of urban landscapes, including our public landscapes. The NBS have been developed over the recent decade and present best science and practice. The NBS approach aligns with green infrastructure, the AICHI, I'm not sure what that is, Accords, and more. And then the link to the site is included in the chat.
So is that's available to everybody that would like to tune in on the chat during
Yes, it
this
is.
time? Okay.
Yeah, or after. It will be on.
Hi, I'm back. I heard that you were reading the link I just put in the chat.
Yeah, you want to talk about it?
Sure. Excuse me, I had to step away for a moment. I've got food on the stove and I'm trying to multitask even though I'm listening to you. So please excuse me. As Lolly knows, I'm a recovering architect, and that's my joke line. You're not laughing. Yes, you are. Thank you, Kate. Because architects and engineers have caused great damage on the planet. So in contrast, nature-based solutions are coming out of ecological restoration science. So for example, your references to Paul Stamets and others, trying to use natural processes to repair, regenerate, restore functioning ecosystems kind of falls under this umbrella called nature-based solutions, which is increasingly becoming policy in Europe, for example, and in some international working groups. So the Aichi Accords were signed in Japan maybe 20 years ago. And if I recall correctly, we were committed to restoring minimum 20% of our functioning ecosystems by something like 2020, which of course we failed to do. But so this is a form of a technology and approach, a cultural approach to quote unquote green infrastructure. And so I can tell you that having worked with many civil engineers, they need to understand that we're not working with linear systems. These are network systems and non-linear systems and adaptive systems. Anyway, that's the background, if you will, to the thinking, the science behind nature-based solutions. And I invite you to take a look at those links among others, and let me know if you have any questions, please.
Arlene, I'm not sure.
I see you scratching your head. Did I give you a headache? Joe is going like.
Arlene, I'm not sure we have contact information for you, and we might like to hear more about that another time. Could you give us your email address in the chat?
I did do that already. It's there.
Right. Thank you. Right. Thank you.
Okay.
That's
Sure, I could make a presentation if you would like.
Okay.
But it's
Great.
consistent with the Wald book on regenerative systems,
Yeah.
which I think is on the agenda for today.
Gladys, I have a question. More for Gladys in this case. Will this stay up on the chat even when we go? I mean, once we leave, I know it won't be there, but I wanted to copy and paste this. Arlene, I can talk to you about it. And Gladys, Shelley, Arlene, you and I can talk more about a presentation you might be interested in. And October is open for a new presenter. We are booked till then, should you be interested.
Sure, I can do that.
Great. We'll talk about it some more. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And by the way, on the chat window, all you have to do is put your mouse over it and hold down the mouse button, and you can highlight the whole thing and copy it.
Okay, thanks.
Welcome. Okay.
And
Good deal.
the recording will actually include the chat, so it should be
Right.
there when the recording.
Right.
I see Quinn is raising her hand.
Quinn.
Yeah, I just had two quick questions. One, that system where they're building the wall with the electric current that's running through, is that able to be turned off?
Yes.
Or is it set up? Okay.
It is. And it can be powered by solar. It can be powered by wind.
But it's not set up to run without being able to be turned off.
Can be turned off. Yeah.
Okay.
It can be. And
my other question is, if you would quickly just let us know, Gazalt, is that his name?
Oh, you mean Goreau, Thomas J. Goreau.
Goreau. What's his mother's name besides being?
I don't remember. I don't remember. Did you say what his mother's name?
Yeah, I mean, she was an oceanographer. Like, we haven't heard about any women at all, just for the sake of getting the inclusion, besides just being some man's mom. She is a scientist, and I'd like to know her name too.
I would too. And so that's something that we can find out, but I don't know right now. Anything else?
Hey, Geoff.
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention the email address that Gladys put in the chat room for you is your old email address. You might want to say what your current one is again for the transcript.
OELSNER GEOFF Oelsner Geoff @gmail.com. maybe somebody else has something they'd like to share.
Thank you, John.
Hello, hello, Terry. Hello, Terry. Hello, Karen Takamoto. Several of you I don't see. Anybody else want to make a comment or a question or share some information? All
We're ready
right.
to move on?
Shall we?
I guess so.
Well, I met Daniel Wall about 11 years ago. Was somebody wanting to speak? Did I misunderstand? Okay, I guess not. I met Daniel Wall at Findhorn about 11 years ago at a conference, and he showed a lot of interest in my work. Particularly, he helped me connect with Rupert Sheldrake and some other people who gave me some early support as I connected with the head of research at the Institute for Noetic Science and other people that I've been working with over the years on my project with intuitive people and scientists. And I have also given him some support. I'm very grateful to have been able to have taken some of my resources and helped with the funding and also the distribution to thought leaders of all of these books, except Mr. Garose. And I think Daniel's Designing Regenerative Cultures, although very specific in its chapters, is also very general, and it points towards the use of questions, and not questions that we instantly try to answer, but questions that lead philosophical home base from actually a quote from Rainer Maria Rilke's Letters to a Young Poet, where he wrote, "Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart and try to love the questions themselves like locked rooms and like books that are now written in a very foreign tongue. Do not now seek the answers which cannot be given you because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live them. And the point is to live the questions." And Daniel has caused me to live more with my questions and be able to tolerate not knowing and learn more instead of coming to the kind of premature conclusion that might end up creating havoc in an ecosystem, for example, if the wrong fungus was used or the wrong plant. So he's applying a design-based approach to what one might call regenerative thinking. And I love that word. It goes beyond sustainable. I'm sure you're all aware of that. It's actually not just sustaining, but regenerating. And when Rodale's daughter in 2015, I think, wrote her essay on regenerative agriculture, that word came into even more common usage. But the Extinction Rebellion has a whole section, that group of people in the UK that are actively protesting against the lethargy about climate change. They have a whole section that's based on their study of Daniel's book. It's being, I'm so proud of it. It's being translated all kinds of places. In fact, I just wrote on and on about this in the longer version of this because I think it's so wonderful. 4 main ideas in the book. The shift from sustaining innovation to transformative innovation, if we're going to be thriving as a species within a multi-species environment. That's one shift. The shift from dualistic thinking, by which he means either or, to systemic thinking, by which he means both and. Inclusive thinking, not exclusive thinking. Not that one must exclude exclusive thinking. The shift from the old technological models, and here comes biomimicry by Janine Benyus, co-founder of the Biomimicry Institute, and a lot of references to biologically inspired innovations. And Daniel has worked, my friend Daniel Wall has worked closely to create biomimicry conferences and groups in the European community. And finally, the shift from large-scale agriculture, not that it needs to be left behind, and it certainly can't be at this point, and traditional economics towards health and resilience by creating circular, more bioregionally based economies. which brings me back to some of Leslie and my first experiences going to Oak conferences, Ozark area community conferences, when David Henke and other visionary people in the Missouri and Arkansas Ozarks years ago, in around 80, 81 or so, began inaugurating bioregional conferences that are still happening to this day. So these are the major topics that are discussed in a variety of chapters. And the root cause of our problem, as Daniel sees it, and this can be parsed in a lot of ways, seen from a lot of perspectives, is the false separation between nature and culture. We have to move beyond simply learning from nature to seeing that we can design as part of nature. We can safeguard diversity. We can nurture systemic health and strengthen the planetary life support system. We're doing it. There are examples that are given, and that's the center of my talk, really, of the examples, ranging in scale from different kinds of green chemistry, such I was discussing with plastics, product design, which will be a big factor in the development of biochar, Arlene, sustainable architecture. I wasn't going to say much about it, but inspired by the late John T. Lyle's work, the Regenesis Group, the work of Bill Reed, Integrative Design Collaborative, William McDonough, the Cradle to Cradle approach to industrial production, and a variety of other architectural innovations that are more forward-looking, many of which I have no idea what they are mentioned. So that is another aspect to designing a regenerative culture. It's coming pretty thick and fast here because I'm trying to cover some ground with some specifics in a rather quick way. But I can say that we're going to have to collaborate like hell to get any of this stuff done. And one of the central factors for me is being with people who are not interested in establishing their territory, but who are, not following some sort of territorial imperative, but are actually collaborating. Lolly, please.
Geoff, do you know about Mike Reynolds and his Earthship houses in Taos, New Mexico?
Well, I have been there. I visited.
Yeah, us too. Right. Okay, thank you. That's all.
I visited on my way to the to that springs, that hot springs.
Yeah.
Where I saw white hippies wearing loincloths and black and Native Americans from the Taos Pueblo wearing leisure clothes and drinking beer.
Yeah.
God help us all.
Joe,
Anyways.
I think Joe had something else she was showing. Joe, what was that you had there?
Please. Joe? You sure? I can't hear you.
Am I on?
Yes.
I just wanted to add that I think you were referring to Maria Rodale. That's her name. She's not the daughter, she's the granddaughter of Jerome Irving Rodale. What's that?
Is it J.R. or J.L. Rodale?
J.I. Jerome Irving Rodale is his name, and she's the head of the entire publishing empire, and her name is Maria Rodale.
I've been touched by their books, and I bet you a lot of you have been too. Well, whether it's ecological design, permaculture, systemic biomimicry, or regenerative design, these all have a design-based methodology which takes as its common kind of interest co-creating a life where humanity and nature can survive and thrive together. So here I can give you a couple of examples from Wall's book that I think are significant, some of which actually occur in different forms in Drawdown. But it feels like it's kind of been a little more of an active time for sharing, so I want to keep checking in. The Australian permaculture designer Darren Dougherty helped promote an approach called holistic land management and holistic planned grazing. If any of you read Acres USA, which is a fantastic magazine, this was developed by Alan Savory, and it's a methodology that's been tested and proven for regenerating degraded grasslands and prairies. You know about desertification and its increasing pervasiveness. This approach allows for grazing amongst trees in groves, and also grazing in situations where the animals are moved from place to place, and their excrement continues to improve the quality of the land, and it's pretty dramatic, as opposed to being within one sequestered fenced area, and that a field without trees oftentimes. Apart from the production of food and resources for regional bioeconomies, regenerative agriculture's offering quite a few ways to slow down climate change by regenerating soil fertility, increasing the water retention capacity of the soil thereby, replenishing aquifers thereby, by storing carbon underground in the form of organic matter and also in the form of root mass. And this kind of regenerative work is not just being done on small farms, like my friend Christopher Nesbitt's Maya Mountain Research Center in Belize, or many other places. Actually, I might mention here that literally hundreds of Chinese agricultural stations are now producing biochar actively as part of a national policy. And there are other countries like in, I think Ghana, I forget, but other countries where this kind of thing is happening too. So large scale things are happening as well as small scale things though. And the Chinese filmmaker, also a Findhorn graduate, a member of a group that I'm part of called the Findhorn Fellows, John D. Liu, L-I-U, has documented these projects over a number of decades. China regenerated 8.6 million acres of heavily degraded land on a plateau area in only 10 years. Similar work is happening in the Ethiopian highlands in Belize through the work of my friend Christopher Nesbitt, who is a mentee of Albert Bates, and in many other places. So again, we're talking about something here not in the realm of a panacea, but a kind of patchwork, gradual, collaborative, growing, highly fertile kind of movement that's happening. Another one of several examples that are given in the Wall book. Well, just one more. There's a biomimicry approach to the regeneration of polluted waterways, rivers, and lakes being developed by Michael Shaw and his crew, the Scottish company Biomatrix Water, and they're actually helping clean up rivers. And they're using specific targeted bacteria that metabolize different kinds of toxins to do so. This is another group, and it's actually based at the Findhorn community. I'd like to brag a little bit about my friend's book, but that's not as essential as listening to your comments if you'd like to say anything further here. Joe, did you want to say something? Okay. Well, it's being used as a text in a lot of academic settings, just like I hope Art's book is being used. In his context, it's being used among them in the master's program at Schumacher College. You may remember John Schumacher's work, Small is Beautiful. My friend Daniel went to that college, and the sustainability program at the University of Dundee, by universities in Brazil, Canada. A large number of PhD and master's students are always contacting Daniel to interview him for his theses, more than he can really accommodate. But the book is really, I mean, it's indicative of the kind of wave of interest that this rather technical, kind of dense and difficult, not an entirely enjoyable read, is being sold in department stores in Brazil and will soon be marketed widely in Portugal. There's German, Japanese, French, Spanish, and Slovakian translations in the offing. And like I said, the Extinction Rebellion established a regenerative culture subgroup in consultation with Daniel. So these guys, these wonderful men, minus Paul, but including Paul, just minus Paul in the picture, have all been members of this British Commonwealth task force to reverse climate change over the past several years. And it's really through them and my communications with them and regular reports from them that I've been able to feel motivated and inspired. And I hope that you'll all find others too. I hope this talk will be helpful to you and that you'll find others who are doing significant forward-looking work to move us forward, because the grief is great. The possibilities of our extinction, great. Go ahead, Lolly, and we need
Is there, can we Google the British Commonwealth Task Force and find out more about them or start getting notices from them?
You know what? I don't think so. I think you can find out some information about them, but I don't think we can get insider information about their machinations and workings. I get some, and if you ever would like to talk with me, I'll give you the scant but interesting information that I get over the years. But there have been some financing problems, as you might expect, in a situation where there are some people who question the of all of this in that government right now, but it's moving ahead. Feels to me like that's an awful lot now to have shared, and I'm happy to share a song or two or to share further conversation with you, but that seems to me to be a good place to stop. If there is interest, I can discuss my work further with bringing together cloud physicists, climate scientists, computer climate modelers, and people with precognitive abilities that have been tested in laboratory conditions that are extraordinarily rigorous. And I can talk about some of the work that I'm doing, have in the past, and am doing presently and plan to do, and the peer-reviewed piece that's going to be coming out later this year about one aspect of that in a journal called Explore, that will be co-authored by one of the more leading parapsychologists, also a neuroscientist in the country, and also a physicist who is a very open-minded individual, as you might expect, about our work with the group that is highly intuitive and that has worked together on a lot of different projects and been helpful to industry, to the government, and to other scientists in the past.
Art?
Geoff, I was wondering if you were going to get into the noetic sciences, the Lorien Foundation, Edgar Mitchell, some of the things that are not, that you haven't discussed so far.
Well, that's what I'm talking about, and my feeling is that I can talk a little bit about it.
Okay.
But it's a topic that I've given a lot of my life to in a serious and thoughtful way, and it deserves some time for genuine conversation. I don't argue about this, but I do like to discuss it, and I would like to have time to have a really respectful conversation about it sometime. Certainly glad to share a little bit. And Art, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to say two things, I guess. One is second your suggestion of the Schumacher book. Again, this is a book I read probably 40 years ago.
Exactly.
Small is Beautiful, you're talking about, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's a wonderful book. It was really a groundbreaking book at that time, but it still is very pertinent and very relevant. It's a rather short, easy book by a very good thinker. So I want to second that recommendation. And more importantly, Wall, you said, stresses the necessity of we humans thinking of ourselves as actually part of nature.
Yes.
And I think this idea goes very deep, and it strikes at the heart of really our separateness right now and our problems with global warming and all of this. We still think of ourselves as separate, and in very specific senses. We should have learned better with Copernicus, or sometime after that. We certainly should have learned better after Darwin, but we still think that we're separate from the rest of nature, and therefore we lord it over nature, and we can affect nature without it affecting us back. But we're right in the middle of it. And I have a modest suggestion along these lines. It's a typical academic sort of suggestion from an academic, I guess.
Buddy.
It involves history courses, and especially the big world history type courses. They need to start from about 10 million years ago, and not from the agricultural revolution about 10,000 years ago. They need to go back before there were humans on Earth, and before there was anything, before we split off from the other apes. And we need to see ourselves as a species of ape, basically. We really need to see ourselves as deeply part of nature, just like the other apes, at least. And that involves learning about evolution and learning about how the human race evolved. And I think, personally, I find that line of thinking and that line of history and archaeology and all is just fascinating. And it's certainly worth a couple of weeks of time in any world history course. So historians ought to think of themselves as going back much before the agricultural revolution. A lot happened back there, way before we were even Homo sapiens, and it's affected us deeply. And we really need to see that, or we're not going to really get past this. And people who argue we're still really separate, and everything started 5,000 years ago and all that nonsense. That really hurts us. It really hurts us. And there's a large segment of our population, even here in the supposedly educated United States, that believes things like that. And so I'm arguing for a much bigger view of history.
My God, 10 million years ago, where would we start? Would it be the earliest hominids, or is it pre-hominid?
This is pre-hominids, yeah.
Okay.
You want to go back before we split off from the other apes. We split off from an animal that was maybe something like the chimp. The chimpanzee and the bonobos are closest related to us that are alive. So you can think of the other apes and the human line, which had about 20 other species. It wasn't just us. It wasn't just Homo sapiens. There have been 20, 25 species of hominids, two-footed creatures, basically, rather than staying in the trees or walking on all four. And that split occurred about 6 million years ago. So you want to go back before that and start from there and see how all these different lines develop, see how all the different human lines develop. I mean, you can cover this in a big in a couple of, at least in a cursory way, in a couple of weeks, in a big history course.
There'd be a lot of this.
See that, and you get the context of how we really grow from nature. We're not just put here a few thousand years ago to lord it over nature. And I really think it makes a deep difference, more than we might think.
Thank you. You know, there's a lot of this that I won't have understood until I study like you've just suggested. But one thing I've always thought is how mammal territoriality in no way has maybe worse with human beings because of our capacities. And, you know, it could be an idea, get the hell out of my den, you know, this is my survival. It could be a philosophical concept. It could very rightly and correctly be our offspring. Get out of my house, get out of my den, you're endangering me. But this kind of adrenalized, necessarily intense and sometimes ferocious territoriality continues to resonate through ourselves, you know, through our neurology. And that's my one example as I think about how horrible human beings are to each other. That often comes up for me rather than some sort of philosophical consideration of what evil is or anything like that.
I gotta take a slightly different take on that. I think what you say is true about violence and territoriality, but we're also genetically altruistic. We've had to be. We never would have survived. You can see this especially in the bonobos, but you see a lot of it in the chimpanzees. They're taking care of each other. They fight. The chimpanzees are pretty territorial, and they fight, and they have deep concerns about other people horning in on their family, and other chimps, I should say, horning in on their own family. You watch a chimp for a while, and you get a feeling for how humans really are, in a way. And but I think that altruism is bred at least as deeply into our bones, into our genes.
Oh God, I really want. I believe it. I believe it. I believe it. I see good.
Desire to get along.
I want to believe it.
To be kind. We get a deep satisfaction out of being kind, and I think it goes way back. It's not just something that comes from religion. It's come from way before that. So there are a lot of good things that are bred into our genes over time, and it's good to find out what some of those things are and how that happened.
That brings it around to a balanced kind of view, and I see behave. Jack Stewart wants us to know. Jack, say something. Jack, we don't see your picture.
Well, this is a book. Okay, yeah, it's as soon as I put the video on, I start getting breaking up, so I'm keeping that off. But a book I keep on my desk that I keep referring to is Behave by Robert Sapolsky, and it touches on all of the things you've just been, you and Art have been discussing. It's a dense book, but even the footnotes you don't want to miss. It's humorous, but also explains why the policeman pulls the trigger at the moment that he does, and it takes it all the way back thousands of years. Or conversely, why someone reaches out a hand to help someone else. It's just a wonderful overview of human nature.
Jack, can you say the name of your book one more time?
Behave.
Yeah, it's called Behave, The Biology of Humans at Our Best and Worst by Sapolsky, and it's Sapolsky. He started his research, and I first became aware of him years ago when he was working with baboons in Africa, and he wrote a paper on it. And I've been sort of following his career ever since. Wonderful read.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jack, I want to see your face. I haven't seen you for a long time. Where are you?
I'll see what I can do here.
Yeah, come on.
There, how's that?
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Hi.
I'm glad it's in. You don't have to shave.
I know what you mean. Okay. Anybody else want to share here? Feels good.
This isn't about like the world since the beginning of time or anything, but when you were talking about biochar, I did want to say that as another aspect of kind of one of those patchwork remediation attempts, Sweden has been for at least a decade in an urban scale collecting urine to use as a fertilizer. And so, you know, it's just, there's so many things that we can do, and that's another one of them, but it's been, you know, that's being done on a fairly large scale, not just John Brown's farm or something, you know.
Yeah, thanks. And it reminds me what's happening in South Korea right now with the use of wide-ranging compost collection, food scraps. Well, I think that some of you might wish to not do this, but I'd like to quickly sing my biochar song because it offers you something positive and it's fun. And Albert Bates and I worked on this a little together. So, you know, here's how it goes. To help reverse the carbon cycle, and the rise of greenhouse gases we can burn, turning carbon from our enemy to ally by firing up plant biomass. Pyrolyze in it, that's the smokeless way to make up biochar. The carbon star burn using fire to cool the earth. Plant biomass gets wasted every climate changing day. There's sewage, sludge, crop residue, insistent invasives, cow patties, logs and wood chips, algae and beached seaweed. There's biomass plenty in the planetary pantry to supply us all the biochar we need. Comes a big old list of things it'll do. It'll help restore the coral and kelp forests in our ocean. It'll cook the meals and heat the hearts of millions. It can spread reforestation and regenerative farming, and make better insulation for more livable green buildings. And that's not all. It'll filter toxic wastes from our poisoned soil and water, create fantastic plastics, stronger concrete, cardboard paper. There'll be more discoveries coming in wave on wave of biochar carbon cascade. So we can heal the earth of the CO2 polluting it. If we draw down carbon while we're up to cooling it, we're gonna need a lot of help from friends like biochar, the carbon star burn, using fire to cool the earth. You can read all about it in Burn, using fire to cool the earth. So that'll tell you a little bit about Burn.
That was
Coming
good,
along to
Geoff.
talk, and
Thank you, Geoff.
I hope that you'll listen to Lissa. I've been a total newcomer here. I came to the talk on Drawdown and was really interested and helped by it. I haven't been to others. I hope to come in the future, and I'm happy to be invited again in the future if you'd like me to share on other topics that I might know a little bit about.
All
And
right.
in the meantime, peace.
Shelley, unmute yourself, Shelley.
I'm sorry we didn't get to hear anything about, or not much about, the noetic sciences. I think that those insights that you had in that realm would be valuable for us, and I hope that we get a chance to, maybe you could, like, 3 minutes on it to give us a taste of that mind.
That's very nice of you to ask. And again, I'm happy to share at greater length, but the way it all started for me, it's hard to talk about this because they're different paradigms. And if you've had a personal experience that stunned you like I did when I was in 8th grade or 9th grade, it's easier to be open. There was to be a lottery, a drawing of numbers at our school, and I was sitting with the science teacher at his table for lunch, and we were told it was going to be tomorrow, and I suddenly found coming out of my mouth, I said to the science teacher and everybody at the table, it'll be 4:52. And the next day before the drawing, I found it coming out of my mouth again. It'll be 4:52. And it was 4:52. And there were already things like that happening, and there have been things that have been even more amazing. And as a result of that, and some precognitive dreams and other things that gave me some sort of traction on this topic, you must understand that I didn't know anything about this topic. I didn't know some of the various psychic manifestations that I was to experience were things that other people had experienced for a long time. So it was very impressive to read about. And in the 80s, I discovered a book called Psychic Archaeology, which was my first exposure to the idea, other than Edgar Cayce's work, which some of the people of his time found evidentially significant. And other than at least knowing about the fact that William James, C.G. Jung, later in his life, even Sigmund Freud, but particularly people like Sir William Crookes, the great Frederick W.H. Myers, Edmund Gurney, and others who started the British psychical research at the beginning of the last century and the end of the century before. I didn't really know much about the distinguished past history of the study of parapsychology. But this book, Psychic Archaeology, made me aware that allegedly there were certain people that were able to do something like dowsers do, which is to say, okay, here's the place, you dig down a certain amount and you'll find this. And you know, in the case of a dowser who does that, or somebody who purports to do this, unless there's some sort of tomfoolery going on, they're either right or they're wrong. And so I was interested in the fact that some of the time were right to a degree that was extraordinary. And when I co-authored this book, I did a longish essay, which is on my website, called Unorthodox Approaches to Radiation Protection Deserving Further Research. And one aspect of that was that I asked 10 questions of one of the people who'd been most successful in helping the archaeologists, a former NASA scientist who was massively intuitive. And I asked him 10 questions about radiation protection. And I was not impressed with his answers. And I've had a series of interactions with some of the greater remote viewers for government intelligence gathering purposes who are now retired, who are friends, and others who are extraordinarily developed and intelligent parapsychologists, and taken it forward and felt like over the last, especially 5 years, that I've received a little bit more substantial results in some of the areas that I'd be glad to go into later on in a longer talk, where I could do justice not only to that, but there's going to be a variety of responses to this material. And I'd like to have a really a congenial length of time to talk about it.
Thank you, Geoff. Any other closing comments anybody would like to bring up? Art, were you raising your hand?
Yeah, I'd like to mention one last book in connection with what I brought up before about evolution and 10,000 years of history, or 10 million. There's a very good book called Mama's Last Hug. It's about chimpanzees. It's about chimpanzees today. It's not about evolution. It's not about old history. It's by a person who is a behaviorist who studies monkeys and chimpanzees and bonobos and such. His name is Franz de Waal. Franz is one word, and de Waal. Mama's Last Hug, and it's it's very enjoyable, and you'll learn a lot about our closest relative, the chimps. And boy, he's got some stories to tell about these animals. They're just wonderful, and they're clearly as fully conscious as we are. Their brains aren't as big as we are. They're quite conscious, and they have families, and they have their battles and their psychological problems and everything, just like we do. And it's an amazing book. They're just getting into this field of animal studies, I think, and they're going to find that there's a lot more going on with the other animals than we think there is.
Well, let's not forget Jane Goodall, who's
Oh,
been
yeah.
had for decades.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right on. Quinn, you might be interested in also presenting for this sometime based on some of the sharings you've done here.
Mhm.
I'm just trying to finish the degree, and
I
then
know it. Let's go
free
look.
to
Terry.
share what I have read and know and think and all that. Thank you, though.
Yeah.
Let's
Terry.
see. Lolly, you you unmuted yourself. Did you have a comment?
Not now, thank you. Well, Art, Mama's Last Hug, I read a little quick thing on that, on this old female chimp who was probably dying, and one of her first companions came to her, and she, of course, recognized him and, was there with him. I have dogs and donkeys and all these things, so I know critters are lovers. That's all.
Let me just note that there have been a couple more good comments. And Terry's put in a couple of links, and Jack Stewart put in a link about conservation ranching, and Terry about Synergy, a company that works on human waste recycling. And you can check those. This recording will be posted on a YouTube site that we're still trying to get set up. So until then, it will come out and be posted on the site that the book forum actually has on the Omni website right now, which is it's on the left side of the screen when you go to that screen. And it should be up within the week.
Thank you.
Geoff, thank you. It's been wonderful.
You're welcome, and thank you all.
Thank you for everybody who came and participated. Yeah. And especially thank you to you, Geoff.
Thanks, Geoff.
I loved it. And before this happened, a large number of tiny ants crawled out of my computer, the one I'm using here. And I was really afraid you'd be seeing me do this through the whole presentation. But they were good to me, and you were too. Thanks a lot, everybody. Bye-bye.
I do have another question before everybody goes off. I said this earlier when we first got on, and those few of us who were started, and you reminded me, Geoff, with your ants, we have thousands of tiny 1-inch millipedes. Do you all have them anywhere? Jack, do you have thousands of millipedes where you live here in Newton County? Jack has turned his sound off. He may not. Do you, Jack? Do you have thousands of millipedes?
Yeah,
What are you doing about them? What are you doing about them? Apparently, they bring no disease. They don't eat anything. Our Bangladeshi medical missionaries across the road have been fighting them, and they did it with diatomaceous earth, but they're still here. Anybody else have thousands of millipedes?
None.
Out here in the country only then, huh? Okay. All the rest of you are in town, I suppose?
And your chickens won't eat them?
No, nothing eats them. No, we have yard roosters, that are supposed to get our ticks, but they don't eat them. The dead corpses of inch-long, teeny tiny millipedes are on the edges of the house everywhere, or the barn, or any structure. And they're on the ground. Thank you.
Okay, everybody. Well, thank you very much. And we will see you next month. Please come back. You will be getting links from Lolly before the next session happens.
Yeah, it's Lissa Morrison, Native Plants in Landscaping. And it will be on the omnicenter.org website. It's already up if you want to take a look at that, just to see what Lissa is going to be presenting. Talmadge? I'm trying to remember what the name of the person is who wrote the book. It'll be on the Omni site, so you can order the book if you'd like.
Didn't she co-start or co-found the White River Nursery?
Yes.
Yeah, she knows plants.
And the Ozark Botanical Gardens, she's worked there for years and has recently retired from it. So she has a tremendous amount, an encyclopedic amount of knowledge on native plants.
Yeah.
Looking forward to hearing her.
You might know about your millipedes.
What about it?
You might know about your millipedes.
Yeah, I need to get back into, I'll ask her. Thank you, Quinn. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, the big deal about native plants is all the wonderful bugs they bring now that we're in a 40 to 60% possible extinction of insects. So
Uh-oh.
it's not just native plants alone, it's the whole ecosystem. So it'll be
Apparently
wonderful.
the millipedes are okay with it though.
It's been a pleasure, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. We've really enjoyed you,
It was
everybody.
great.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Gladys.
Goodbye,
Geoff.
friends.
Thank you, Gladys. Much love, Lolly.
You too.
Blessings. Happy week.